Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Peiniger, and I'm very excited to have this guest on who's been on. I think this is your fourth time on Mormon Book Reviews. You were on a couple years ago, and now you've recently come back on to talk about your scriptures, the Chronicles of the Children of Jaraneck. And of course, we're going to have links in the description because they're in the process of doing a capital campaign to be able to make editions of these in beautiful leather-bound editions. And if you give £100 or more, you'll get a free copy. So we'll have links in the description for that. And by the way, Matthew, first of all, welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you. It's great to be back. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, it's so funny. And just so you know, we're gonna have links in the description. And when do you expect to have these printed? Later this year? Is that the game plan?
Yeah, we're aiming for the middle of the year. So August time.
Okay.
Because obviously the process is going to be difficult with the printer and going backwards and forwards. But yeah, hopefully by the middle of the year we'll have them all out. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, check it out. They need to raise £5,000. And what, are you about halfway there, or how are you doing on the
No,
campaign?
we're all the way there. We're all the way there.
Oh, you raised the
Since,
money?
yeah.
Oh my
Since I
God.
appeared
So
last time, yeah, it's
so
crazy.
basically, you coming on my program helped a little bit.
Oh, yeah, massive. Yeah.
I had no idea. That is so cool. So congratulations. So, but if people still want to donate, they can, right?
If they still want to donate, they can go to our Facebook page and donate straight to the church through the church website on a donate page.
Okay.
That cuts out costs and the middleman and all that. So, but we've raised about £5,500. So
Oh,
yes,
I had no idea. Well, I'm so glad I could help you with your endeavor, my friend. That's great. I'm looking forward to getting my copy.
yeah. Well, yeah, you're on the list, so
I
you'll
think
be getting it.
I definitely think I've contributed more than £100 worth of
Oh,
publicity.
definitely. Yeah. You'll get a copy. No worries.
So one of the reasons we're having Matthew back on the program is he, in our last interview, actually created what I call the characters document of from the Chronicles of Jaraneck, or the Book of Jaraneck, that is the first set of scriptures that are in here. And and these were actually translated from plates. Um, and and basically your claim is that this inscription. Okay, and I want you all to look at that, and then look at and then underneath is the translation. My name is Jaraneck, son of Ishna, from the house of Ishna. Is that properly pronounced, my friend?
Yeah, close enough. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well,
And so,
I'll pass muster. You're all right.
okay, great. Now you claim that this is the Adamic language, but what you wanted to clarify, and of course, I never made the claim because, of course, let's just give a little history, folks. Because I got a little bit of criticism. By the way, I was talking to somebody in Tallahassee who is actually holds a very important church calling in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he mentioned, he said, "Boy, that's really interesting stuff from that Matthew Gill." So even regular, just mainstream Latter-day Saints are very intrigued by what you are doing and your scriptures and your claims. Now, let's just talk. What is the pure Adamic language? You claim this is the Adamic language, but let's go and we're going to rewind the tape a little bit. So basically, what happens is this idea of an Adamic language, a pure Adamic language. Of course, it pre-existed the Restoration. This is something in Jewish tradition. It's this idea that before the corruption of the languages, with the scattering of all the different tribes and groups, people groups at the Tower of Babel, everybody spoke what would have been the Adamic language, and of course, probably wouldn't have been pure, but it would have been come from the Adamic language. I don't know, but we'll have to explore that possibility. And then what happens is that there's a select group of people that are able to keep the language, and that would be the Jaredites, and also the people who would later produce this, be the compilers of the history and the scriptures of the Chronicles of the Children of Jaraneck, in particular the first book, the Book of Jaraneck,
Yeah,
and that you claim comes from plates and that
yeah,
you had a Urim and Thummim
yeah.
and you interpreted them. And this here, just so you know, this is the opening line, the very first verse of the Book of Jaraneck. So then where does this idea of pure Adamic language come into the picture? Well, so basically, long story short, one of the first times that Brigham Young and Joseph Smith met, I don't know what the context was, but I think it was in a service or something. But Brigham Young starts speaking in tongues. And Joseph Smith immediately recognized it and claims to say, or claims that he said, this, you just spoke the pure Adamic language. So now we know that it was at least spoken as late as the 19th century by Brigham Young. Now you make the claim that you were given plates to translate that contained the Adamic language, which you used to translate. So is that a good summation there, my friend?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much accurate. Yeah,
But
I mean,
what you wanted to clarify, though, because you said you've never made the claim that this is the pure Adamic language. I want you to talk about maybe the evolving the development of the Adamic language in this context of how these scriptures are produced. Were the plates in the pure Adamic language?
right.
And just maybe kind of just on that a little
Okay.
bit.
All right, so let's rewind a little bit. So I've never made the claim that the plates or the characters on the plates were what some people call pure Adamic. Um, uh, as you've just pointed out quite well, um, Joseph Smith and Brigham Young both discussed the topic of pure Adamic language when Brigham Young was supposed to have spoken it in Joseph Smith's company. But if we just park that to one side a minute, because if you've got problems with Brigham Young, you might, let's just park that to one side and let's go back and look at the history of the Adamic language. I would surmise that from the biblical record and also from the history that is contained in the Chronicles of the Children of Jaraneck, that Adamic was spoken by Adam and Eve when they left the Garden of Eden, and all their children and children's children up until Noah spoke with that language, maybe even wrote in that language. And then, of course, comes the flood. Noah's family obviously survive. Whether or not they're the only ones to survive, I suppose, is a totally different video. But let's just say Noah and his family survive. Let's say they're the only ones. They therefore come out of the ark with their family, speaking an Adamic language. We get to the Tower of Babel then, and from what the scriptures tell us, everybody spoke in the same tongue. Now, whether that's exactly the same Adamic that Adam and Eve spoke or Noah spoke, I have no idea. All I know is that the brother of Jared and the prophet Aaron asked the Lord to preserve their language because it was the language of the first parents, i.e. Adam and Eve. They didn't want to lose a connection to their historical roots because they hadn't sinned. They hadn't done anything to anger the Lord. So don't punish us by taking away our link to the past. Well, obviously he preserves those two language groups, and yet again another topic you can talk about is, are they the only ones to have that preserved? We don't know yet. But nevertheless, he curses everybody else's language. This is where you get other language types and other language groups. So fast forward the story, really, really fast forward the story, you get to Jaraneck, who's right at the very end of his civilization. He states that he is writing in the language of his fathers. Okay? Now, he is writing upon the 24 plates of Jaraneck in a tribute to the first father of the nation. So he naturally calls the plates after the first father of the nation, but also wants to write in the language of the first father of the nation. He doesn't say that's his language. He says, I'm writing in the language of my fathers. He also doesn't state in the record that he's writing, because the way I want to clarify it is there have been some comments sent to me personally that, well, is this pure Adamic? What does that mean? Well, firstly, by the time you get to Jaraneck, it wouldn't be pure, because there's hundreds, 1,000 years of history gone by. Languages change over time. You go back to my language, I'm English. Go back 500 years, you'd be very hard pressed to understand English. You go read Chaucer, it's very difficult, very difficult. And he only lived not too far from here. So you look at language and the way it progresses. All I know is that Jaraneck is writing in the language of his fathers, and that language of his fathers would have been Adamic. However, it would not have been his common tongue or the language he wrote in regularly. Because by the time we get to Jaraneck, which is right at the very end of the story, he's at the end, he's compiling these records to save them from destruction.
And what's the date roughly in the historical calendar when this is happening?
Roughly about 500 BC.
Okay.
I always say, and I always have done, give or take 50 or 60 years either side, but a
Okay.
rough period. So about that time period, we know by that time period, they've already interacted with at least 2 different people groups in this record who don't have the same language as them. So you put together these 3 different people groups, and they've got to live together, they've got to work together, they've got to worship together, do whatever they've got to do. And out of that coalition comes a new language. And I've said, and I state again, that the common language tongue of Jaraneck's people would have been probably Proto-Celtic. It certainly would not have been Adamic, because not enough people at that period of time coming through would have known how to read it, would have known how to write it. It would have been kept.
No,
It would have been kept.
It's when you think about it, Matthew, like it's kind of look at Jesus's time. You had the sacred scriptures are written in Hebrew, but Jesus spoke in Aramaic, and at this time you had the Hellenization of Jewish culture, where many Jews
Right.
Greek speakers. So it looks to me like the Adamic language could be viewed as a sacred language in the sense that the Jews view the Hebrew as such. Would that be a fair comparison?
That's exactly right. I mean, it's quite apparent from the record, if you've read it, that the reason he's doing this is because Jaraneck, wants to keep a connection with Aranek, the first father of the nation. And the way that he can do that is by writing in this sacred language that, although it may have altered over that period of time, right? Maybe writing styles or pronunciation or whatever. But although it's altered over that time, it's still a link. It's still a link to the first father of the nation. That's why he writes in that language. That's why most of the priests and prophets from the civilization wrote and spoke in that language. But it wouldn't have been a language that was every day used. And I wish to stress again, this is nowhere have I ever stressed this is the same language that Adam and Eve spoke when they came out of the garden, ever, which is what I would class as pure. I mean, there's no gap between Adam and Eve coming out of the garden and settling wherever they settled in the valley of Adam and enough gap for that. So I would call that a pure language source. How pure that stayed till Noah is debatable. How pure that stayed to the Tower of Babel is debatable. But it's definitely not going to be exactly the same as it would be at 500 BC. Nevertheless, there's enough there for it to link to Father Aranek. There's enough of a link there, and it's enough of a special sacred language for him to use it, and write down on the plate that language, to use that language. Because he didn't have to choose Adamic. He could have chosen the language he wrote and spoke in an everyday basis, but he didn't. He chose something that was special and unique. And also, you've got to remember that as I'm interpreting or translating, depends what you want to use, the record, I'm telling you what I saw. I'm telling you what I experienced, and I'm showing you what I saw and experienced. Have I made any mistakes? I don't know. Possibly. Jaraneck prefaces the book by saying, if there are mistakes or errors in my writing, they are my errors. They're my errors. They're not anybody else's. Exactly like the Book of Mormon. And I think that's important, because in each case, the Book of Mormon and the Book of Jaraneck, that the author of those books of scripture are trying to tell the reader in the future, look, of course there might be mistakes and errors in this, but it doesn't detract from the central message, and the central message is that of Christ. And that's the problem we get into with character documents or histories. We tend to focus on those things and lose sight of what the text is about. And the text, I mean, we've just been going again through the text again, me and my wife, just to make sure this is perfect, or as perfect as we can get it. And Christ is speaking right off the bat in this book. He's ever present through the book. he's the main focus here. He's the guy that really everybody should be reading this record and focusing on. What does Christ say? What do the people have to say about Christ? But I understand the fascination behind characters' documents and how they can, pique people's fantasy and imagination. I can see that. But just as Joseph Smith pointed out many times, is this necessary for the advancement of the work? That character's document that Joseph Smith had, for example, it wasn't really necessary to prove a point. He didn't write that character's document and give it to Martin Harris to take to New York to show to somebody or to show anybody to prove a point, to prove that he had a set of plates with an ancient language on it. Because I don't know, unless I'm very, very mistaken, and if I am, I apologize. The language on those plates can't be verified today. The Reformed Egyptian language on those plates cannot be verified today, which is why you have people writing books criticizing Joseph Smith, criticizing the translation process, criticizing whether they're actually real at all. So, anyway, I know I've gone on too much.
No, it's interesting just to be able to talk to you about this and just like, okay, so because you're making very similar claims that Joseph Smith was making, and I can't talk to Joseph Smith, but I can talk to you and kind of get a sense of, somebody who purports to have engaged an ancient text, in this case plates. Later, a secondary set would be given to you that actually was written more in the language of the common folk, right? Okay. And what I find interesting, the parallel too, is you have it's almost like you have an Old Testament, New Testament. The Old Testament was primarily written in Hebrew, the sacred language. And then the Aramaic sections are written more in the vernacular, much like basic Greek was used, like common Greek, Koine Greek was used in the writing of the New Testament. Even though even though in theory both could have possibly used the sacred language for their scriptures, they chose to go with the vernacular. I find that to be an interesting parallel with the Bible.
Yes, I suppose it is. I mean, I know the reasons why Jaraneck, his son, writes in a different language than his father, and it would be more of a common tongue. It was the language of his mother, and we know why he wants to write in the language of his mother.
Okay.
We know that at the time that he is writing his account, what he calls his Odyssey, his journey, civilization has collapsed as he knows it and understands it. There is no cohesive society apart from the barbaric society that now inhabits the land. And so he would have very little access to a lot of the things that Jaraneck had access to, such as ancient texts, if he needed to refer to another text to write a story, or a journal to write a story down, which he does obviously in the book of Jaraneck. And so Jaraneck foregoes, and plus he's not writing, Jaraneck's not writing about his history. He's writing about his story, whereas Jaraneck's writing about the history of the whole people. Jaraneck's writing a very potted history of his own experiences. And so he chooses to write in the language of his mother, who he reveres, who he lost at a young age, who came from a prominent, what you would probably say, affluent family. And the link between his father and himself is broken. That not only a physical link, but a spiritual link has been broken between him and his father, because he knows not where his father lies. He knows not his father's basic outcome. He knows he's dead, obviously, but he doesn't know where he is, where he's been taken. He doesn't have a link to the old world that his father obviously had. And so it would make perfect sense for him to write in a different language, because and also, if you look at the book of Jaraneck compared to the book of Jaraneck, it is, I suppose, comparing Old Testament to New Testament teaching as well. The approach is completely different, which was great for me as a as a interpreter or translator, because you weren't reading a carbon copy of what you'd already done. It's a completely new, separate set of circumstances, emotions, characters, ideologies, sort of. But yeah, I mean, you could draw a lot of conclusions between this and the Old and New Testament, between this and the Book of Mormon. But I think generally the reason you find a lot of those links, and I was discussing this with a friend of mine just yesterday, the reason you find a lot of these links between these scriptures, it's because they all come from the same divine author. It would be very jarring for me to read the Book of Mormon or the Bible in the Book of Mormon and then read something somebody's purported to bring out, and it's a completely new twist on everything and doesn't make any sense doctrinally, spiritually, or characteristically with Jesus Christ. And I think having those common links is important because it helps show a common divine author at the top.
I think it's interesting. Of course, when I had Richard Bushman on, I brought up your scriptures to him, and I thought he was very kind, and he said, we need to look at the content and see how it comports with what we already believe. And I think and he said, we shouldn't just dismiss it outright. I thought that was really just very he's taken he's not just dismissing it, and he's not just poo-pooing it. I thought that he's taken I thought that's the kind of right approach, especially when you already accept that there have been ancient texts that have been recovered and translated. And that also within the context of the restoration, the idea that other scriptures would come forth, chronicling about the work of Christ in other nations and other times as well, that basically the Book of Mormon and the restoration anticipates something like this,
Of course.
And so I think that's really where this fits within the restoration tradition pretty solidly in many ways.
I think so. I mean, I would place myself and the branch that I lead solidly in the restoration camp. I mean, obviously, it's different to other restoration branches and beliefs because we have additional scripture. But I mean, I would plant it solidly there. Look, you can't have an argument, and it's how do I say this and sound politically nice? You cannot keep having an argument with someone saying that we believe in the Word of God, i.e., the Book of Mormon, right? And in the Book of Mormon, it tells us, and Christ tells the Nephites specifically, it is not just a second or a third hand account. He tells them specifically that he's coming to the third Nephite. Other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, I will also go and visit them, and I also teach them. And obviously, then he's feeding that into, look, you're not the only people around here with a divine mission. You can't keep saying and teaching that, and then when something does come along, go, oh no, we can't accept that. We can't, you can only do that so many times before people start saying, well, hang on a minute, then how can you believe in the Book of Mormon? How can you believe in the Doctrine and Covenants? Because the Doctrine and Covenants, over and over and over again, God tells Joseph Smith, get this right, i.e. the Book of Mormon, and there's other things I have planned for you. But, behave, be a good boy, do what you're supposed to do when I tell you to do it, and you'll have other scripture. It's right here in the Doctrine and Covenants and in the Book of Mormon. And you cannot keep making that argument. And then when something comes along like this, and I'm not saying you have to accept it out of hand, but when something comes along like this, you cannot keep then saying, oh, no, we can't accept that. We can't accept that. The only reason they do that is because of organizational bias. And I'm sorry, but organizational bias is and continues to be the death knell of the restoration going forward. We need to strip away that organizational bias, open up the conversation to include people like myself who have made a claim such as this, and I make the claim that it is true and it is from God and it is written. Come and examine it. But you need a space where those people are allowed to be heard. You cannot keep pushing them to one side and saying, no, they're just nutcases. They're just frauds. They're just shysters. Let me tell you something, Stephen. Apart from this fundraiser, right, I have made no financial gain from what I'm doing. In fact, it's probably cost me money, right? And And it really rubs me up the wrong way when people keep calling me a fraudster, a shyster, someone who's on the take. It really annoys me because there's no proof of any of that. I don't force people to buy these books. I don't force people to come and talk to me on the internet. I don't force people to invite me onto their shows. I simply put my story out there and I say, what do you think? People say, it's interesting, let's have a chat. That's exactly what we need to do. But unfortunately, the space within the Restoration family doesn't allow for that at the moment. Not all over the place. It does in little pockets. It does in little pockets. But unfortunately, those little pockets aren't big enough to make a real change. We need a real shift in our view of the Restoration family and what it means. And I've had this conversation with many people over many years, and still, because the Restoration is headed by one almighty organisation, one almighty behemoth of an organisation, whether we like it or not, most of the common thinking tends to get shifted through that. And until they recognise that they aren't the only organisation that God speaks to, that they aren't the only organisation with authority from God, that they're not the only organisation has authority to baptise or receive revelation, it's a difficult space to live in. But I think, being positive for a second, that there are people who are willing to have that conversation, but to make a real sea change, for people to accept things like this, or at least give it house room, there needs to be a real shift in dynamic thinking.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think it's you know, I've been aware of you for probably, like I said, I think since around 2008. So, and again, I explore all the different facets of the Restoration. It's been kind of my lifetime thing, you know, and I find it fascinating. I find these smaller groups, and people would call you offshoots or break-offs or sect or schismatics, whatever. You are a branch within the Restoration. That's the claim that you make. You're the president, prophet, seer, and revelator of your church. And it's just you're just basically I look at it as that you're making very similar claims that Joseph Smith was making. And
Right.
so it's easy for Christians outside of the Restoration to easily dismiss you because they dismiss Joseph Smith. But I just don't think that if you're in part of the Restoration that you can just wave off Matthew Gill like evangelicals and Protestants wave off Joseph Smith. That's the point I try to make about this whole thing. I think
yeah, it's like a continuing nightmare. It's like, okay, hang on a minute. You expect everybody to believe in the Joseph Smith story, but that didn't happen. That doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
God doesn't just stop speaking to his people because Joseph Smith's not there.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, obviously you'd expect evangelicals and what I would call mainstream Christianity, if you like, to obviously have a hard time with it because they obviously have a hard time with the Joseph Smith story.
Right.
Not everybody, but you know, on the whole, they do. Yeah. And so obviously I expect that from that. I mean, I expect opposition there. That's right. But when you get opposition from your own kind, it's just it can be disheartening and discouraging. But as I say, there are enough people like yourself and others who are quite open to conversations and chats and more than conversations, chats. They really want to get to know you and they really want to understand what's going on. So that's really great.
Yeah, it's called just being empathy and intellectual curiosity. You know, I always tell people there's a statement that's been around, I think, since the 50s, whereas the Book of Mormon is the one book in the world that you can have an opinion of and never have read it. I would argue that within the context of the Restoration, you can have an opinion of this book and never have read it as well. I think, look, if you want affirmation from the outside world, those Latter-day Saints, and you make certain claims about Joseph Smith and your scriptures, then just go and dismiss Matthew Gill like Protestants and evangelicals do for the Restoration. I find that a little ironic, you know, myself. And I think that it's just important just to, hey, look, this exists, just like the Book of Mormon exists. This exists. It's an audacious book, just like the Book of Mormon is, and it's making audacious claims. You as a prophet are making audacious claims, just like Joseph Smith in many ways. And I find that to be fascinating. Now, I just have a couple questions. I want to, so I just really clarify. Raynek is still with us, right? Is
Yeah, he's not dead. Yeah, he's
okay.
not dead.
So
He's
I just
still.
have a few questions about Raynek. Has he interacted with the three Nephites?
Oh, I don't know.
You
I
don't know
don't
that.
know. No,
Could
I
next
don't.
time, because you do engage with him, which could you ask
The
him?
next time I see him, yeah, I'll ask him. Yeah. If I haven't had an interaction with him for a very long time,
Okay.
but I promise you, if I do and it comes up, I'll try and remember. Yeah, yeah. I know I haven't asked that question, so I don't know.
So now he has traveled. He's current contemporaries with us. Has written these scriptures that kind of chronicles the history of England in many ways that kind of give
Yeah.
his view on things. Has he ever left the island? Has he ever gone to other parts of the world?
Ryan,
Yeah.
from my understanding um, of the text that he writes, I think he has had interactions with people that aren't British, or well, not British because he's not really British, is he? Uh, who aren't of his uh, genealogy. I think he's definitely been around. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, I think he's interacted with what he would class as outsiders, foreigners, if you like.
Hmm.
Um, he makes that quite clear in his document that he's observed that, and I would imagine if he's observed it, then he's probably interacted with it at some point. Yeah, you, you can't live in a place as small as Great Britain or Europe, because people often say to me, "Well, is the Book of Jaraneck an isolated? Did it happen isolate?" And I was like, "You're joking. There's no way that this account could have happened isolated. I
Hmm.
mean, Great Britain's only like,
Right.
30, 40 miles from France. So it couldn't have, and we know that because the record bears it out that they had interactions with people from Europe, people from the Americas. So I would imagine, yes, that he has been around and he has seen people that aren't at sea. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. And do you
Sorry.
know, I'm just kind of curious, do you know if any of the records of these people, I know that they had interactions with Jaredites. Do you know if any of the records, like the plates, any of them ended up in the hands of the Jaredites and brought back to North America? Do you know if there's maybe some cross-pollination going on there?
Well, there's certainly cross pollination because we know that a group of Jaredites came to Great Britain during what they call the Second Great War, because this person taught them arts of combat that they didn't understand or didn't know, arts of fortification which they hadn't really thought of before. So we know there was cross pollination there culturally. I don't know whether they left and took. I don't know, Steve. I mean, I don't know. It's a possibility, but I've never asked that question and I've never seen it written down, so I can't say yes. But I also can't say no. Look, if you get cross pollination culturally, you're probably going to get it religiously, and who knows? Maybe one of those warriors that went back home after the Second Great War, because we know they did, took with him a bunch of writings to the Jaredites. We certainly know through the record that the prophet Jaraneck was in the Americas during the Jaredite period and in the Americas during the Nephite period. And we know that he came back to England. So it's impossible in my mind that they wouldn't have swapped religious texts or teachings of some kind.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Well, I just wanted to change gears here real quick because I asked you off camera about this painting that's hanging behind you, and I did not know this, but this is, and I looked it up and verified it myself. This painting is actually an Arnold Friberg painting, and it's of young Joseph. Is this like before the first vision where he's making the inquiry?
Yeah,
Okay,
I think he's on his knees in the grave. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So tell us a little bit about that painting. Because it's not
Well,
the Friberg. For whatever reason, wasn't terribly familiar with that particular one.
and I obviously was familiar with Friberg because of the Book of Mormon pictures. Everybody's growing up, right, in
Right.
Restoration or LDS Church, whatever. And I was in the States. This was years ago. I'm going back like 2005, maybe 2000. It might even been early 2004, 2005. And we were going round like how do you describe it? Like I suppose like secondhand shops, right? Like and I went into one store because I had a ton of books and I love reading, so I went into one store and then I saw uh, this picture framed in the corner. And the first thing that drew it to me was the fact that it was a lad down in the woods. And I thought, oh, hang on a minute, that strikes a tone. So I went over to the picture, had a look at it, and took it to the manager and said, what's this? I'm a Mormon. Is this what I think it is? He went, yeah, it's a picture by Arnold Friberg with Joseph Smith in the grove praying before, you know, uh, his experience. And I asked him if it was a copy or an original, and we had a look, and it's an original. It's and I was taken with it, and paid the money, he asked for it, and took it home, did a bit of research on it. And it is a pretty rare photo. It's not knocking around too much. Picture. It's not knocking around too much. And it's yeah, it's nice. I like it. And that's the story of how I acquired that picture. Totally by random, totally by chance. I was looking for books.
Where in the United States? Because you've never been to Utah, right? So where in the United States did you get this?
Oh, it was in Orlando, in Florida.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. I've only ever been to Florida, so well, that's not true. I've been to New York, but I've never been to the Western Seaboard. That's too far.
Yeah.
6.5 hours on a plane is plenty. Yeah, it was in some little town somewhere in the middle of Florida, in Orlando somewhere. I can't tell you exactly where. And
Tell you what,
it was like,
that's a rare, that's even
yeah,
more rare find to find something, because I scour the thrift stores and the secondhand shops myself for books and items, and every once in a while we find a little treasure. But that's really a really remarkable find to have found that in Florida. I could see you finding that in Independence, Missouri,
yeah.
or in Utah, maybe Western New York, but to find it in Orlando's.
Well, I had to, because I knew I wouldn't get it in the hand luggage on the way home, so I had to get the guy to package it up and post it to me, which cost me even more money.
Small
But
fortune.
I was just determined to get the picture because I went into the shop looking for. Well, I went into the shop looking for a John F. Kennedy book, because I'm nuts about John F. Kennedy. But I went in there looking for a John F. Kennedy book and came out with a picture of Joseph Smith praying in the grove. So yeah,
Wow.
awesome.
Well, that's really cool. Well, I want to thank you, Matthew Gill. First of all, next time you get out to Florida, you got to look me up.
I do.
A couple
Yeah,
hours away from Orlando, so it's not too far away, and we should definitely get together sometime. I'd like to meet you
picture.
in the flesh. And also, I want to invite you. I think you one day you should get out to the States. You need to get out to like Mormon History Association and John Whitmer and Sunstone and Rod Meldrum's Firm Foundation. Get yourself out
I
there.
would love to go there. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'd love to do that.
meet and greet people. And then this is your connection to an American audience. You can come on this American-based program and talk to directly to the saints in Utah, and kind of share your story, which I think it's important that we have these conversations. And I just want to say that for the most part, the responses that I've been getting from your appearances on my program have been positive. And
All right.
I think that that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. I mean, we attack and we criticize each other all the time. And I'm like, we all look through a glass darkly, as Paul says, and we could all use epistemological humility. And we also say we just can't say we know everything. We don't know everything. And you're making a claim that I think it's within the context of the restoration cannot be easily dismissed. Mr. Gill, thank you so much for coming on the program today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And any final words, or we all set?
I think we're all set. I think I've said it many times. More unity, more love. Let's remember Christ in the conversation. If we do that more often, we'll have a lot more positive things to say.
Okay, I love it. Let's keep Christ in the conversation. And Christ is in the center of this book as well. All right, folks. Well, what do you think? What do you think about this Adamic language claim? What do you think about the translation? Have you encountered the Adamic language? Because it implies that it's very plausible that the Adamic language can be actually be something encountered to this day, because Matthew apparently has, and of course we know that Joseph Smith identified it. And by the way, could you actually, how does the Adamic language sound? I did mean to ask you that question. How would you describe the sound? I mean,
Uh,
what does it sound like?
oh boy, I don't know if you've ever heard Welsh. Have
Okay.
you ever heard native Welsh?
Yeah, I've heard Welsh. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it's like a lilty. Um, if you listen to native Welsh, you get like a rhyming rhythm to the language. It's
Okay.
very rhyming rhythmy, almost like I want to say like a song.
Okay.
Obviously, it's not, but that's the way it lilts and rhymes a little. It's certainly not. It's certainly not like a lot of ancient languages. It's very guttural and it's like a very lilty language. That's the best way to describe it. If you want to know what Welsh sounds like, just Google it. Yeah, it's a bit Welshy. Yeah,
And also, I'm just wondering, do you know if anybody's done a breakdown and see if there's any chiastic structures in the book, in these scriptures?
not as far as I know.
Okay,
No,
interesting to
no,
see if there's any chiasms in there as well. We should. Hey, there's people that have the ability probably to run this through some kind of program and probably identify some chiastic structures. So that should be
I'm
the
sure.
next critical project that we could use on of the children of Aranek. Okay, folks, what'd you think? Very interesting stuff. Leave your comments. What do you think of Matthew? What do you think of his scriptures? Have you purchased his scriptures? As a matter of fact, I gave a link the other day to somebody who was interested in purchasing your scriptures. And so, what have you read the book? Have you read these scriptures? What do you think of them? I'm always interested in hearing people's different perspectives on this as well. There's going to be links in the description to Matthew's church website, which if you want to make a donation to, and also maybe make inquiries about purchasing his scriptures, go there. Don't forget, we do have a merch store, mormonbookreviews.com, where we have hats and all sorts of different things there, and t-shirts and hoodies and all that, you name it. And also we have links in the description for those of you who'd like to financially support us on PayPal and Venmo, as well as our Patreons. And I want to thank the Patreons and all those who have financially support the channel. Could not do it without you. Also, I'm looking forward to getting out to Utah to speak at the opening night keynote speech at the Firm Foundation on the 17th. It's going to be at the Expo Center, the Mountain Expo Center in Sandy, Utah. Probably Wednesday the 17th. It'll probably be Rebecca or somebody will be organizing a meetup as well, meet and greet, in case you can't make it out to the Thursday night event that I'll be speaking at. All right. Remember, the most important thing is this, folks. All the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.